And moving on to Thailand, there has been a report that said that Thailand is placed fourth in ASEAN region on the Democracy Index of 2020. And recently, Thailand has been placed fourth in ASEAN and 73rd in the world, while categorized as one of the world's flawed democracies on the Democracy Index 2020 by the Economist Intelligence Unit. Malaysia ranks at 39th position, placing it at the top of the ASEAN index, followed by the Philippines at number 55, Indonesia at 64, Thailand at 73, and Singapore at 74. While Cambodia, categorized as authoritarian, ranked number 130 in the world, followed by Myanmar at 135, Vietnam at 137, and Laos at 161. Brunei, however, was left uncategorized and unscored. The index assigns scores of electoral process and pluralism, functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Of these 5 indices, Thailand's strongest point is its electoral process and pluralism, while the weakest is the functioning of government. Thailand was upgraded from a hybrid regime to a flawed democracy in 2019 after the country finally held elections in March. Thailand's score fell, however, in the latest index. The report referred to the way the government treats its opponents, the dissolution of the Future Forward Party, the arrests of anti-government protesters, and curbs on foreign and domestic media. The report stated that in 2020, 116 of a total of 167, which is around almost 70%, recorded a decline in their total score compared with 2019. Only 38 economies recorded an improvement, and the other 13 stagnated, while their scores remaining unchanged comparing with 2019.
So this index, the Democracy Index 2020, gave Norway top ranking and categorized as full democracy, followed by Iceland, Sweden, New Zealand, and Canada. So like we can see, most of them, if you look at the index in the top rank, most of them are the Western country. And the Asian economy that ranked the highest is actually Taiwan. Taiwan is on the number 11 in the world. The report described Taiwan as the 2020's biggest winner. Taiwan was upgraded from a flawed democracy to a full democracy, and the country's score rose by more than any other country in the index. The election in January 2020 saw a strong voter turnout. The analysts say that it demonstrated the resilience of its democracy at a time when electoral processes, parliamentary oversight, and civil liberties have been backsliding globally. So in 2020, the first time since 2010, the average regional scores in the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index worsened in every single region of the world. A decade ago, the cause of a similar democratic recession was disaffection with governments and a collapse of trust in institutions following the global economic and financial crisis. By contrast, the 2020 worldwide democratic regression was largely the result of the measures taken by governments to address the public health emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has entailed the suspension of the civil liberties of entire populations for prolonged periods. Across the world in 2020, citizens experienced the biggest rollback of individual freedoms ever undertaken by governments during peacetime, and perhaps even in wartime. The willing surrender of fundamental freedoms by millions of people was perhaps one of the most remarkable occurrences in an extraordinary year. The biggest downgrade of the index this time are the civil liberties and functioning of government. It explained that regardless of whether there was a public support for the government COVID-19 measures, Countries that withdrew civil liberties or failed to allow proper scrutiny of new emergency powers were penalized. Because of COVID-19 disease control measures launched across the world, almost all the world's democracies were penalized for curbing their citizens' freedoms. The report said that even in the developed democracies, there was a tendency to stifle dissenting voices, especially those who challenged or raised concerns about lockdowns and their negative impact on society. While in more authoritarian countries, rulers took advantage of the pandemic emergency to crack down even harder on their critics and opponents.
And there was a question over whether the media in these economies were robust and whether there was free and open discussion of public issues with a reasonable diversity of opinions. These set of questions were the reason many countries were downgraded, especially the authoritarian countries. The index shows many issues are not unique to any particular country, whether it is trust in the government, their civil liberties, effective systems of checks and balances, or the functioning of government categories were also downgraded as a result of government's handling of the pandemic. So this is the recent study that has been released recently, and having Thailand as the flawed democracies is not really good news at all here. And not only because of the political system, but the COVID-19 pandemic has put an effect on many of the economies in ASEAN countries as well.
Well, flawed economy is already an upgrade though, because 2 years ago we were categorized as the hybrid regime, which is like mixed between democracy and other things.
Yep.
But flawed democracy, it's I think it's some kind of fancy name for the country that not fully democratic yet.
Right. So flawed democracies compared to Taiwan, which says that it's a full democracy. So based on this study, there are tons of things that Thailand and many other countries in ASEAN can improve right here as well.
There is a full report available. I think if viewers want to see the full report, you have to go on the Economist Intelligence Unit website and register, and then they will send you the link to download the full report. It is very interesting. I mean, it not necessarily mean everybody have to believe it, but the way their logic for giving the score and everything is interesting, I would say.